Uh, Welcome, everyone. This is the third event celebrating the Society of Scribes' 50th anniversary. Uh, Anna Pinto asked me last spring if I would come up with something, and I suggested three events, which I kind of regret now. But having done two, we got to do the third. The first one was at the Grow Your Club, and the idea was to look at the history of the society and how it got started. So mainly look at calligraphy in the 20th century and where things were when people decided to create the Society of Scribes in 1974. And that was a presentation or lecture by myself with a couple people who were there at the beginning, Marcy Robinson and Barry Moritz wasn't there at the beginning, but close. And I'm trying to remember now who the third person was. I'm forgetting, I'm sorry. The second event was at School of Visual Arts, and it was focused on the 1980s and the 1990s, what I sort of call the boom years of calligraphy. And was focusing on what had happened in terms of a broadening of what calligraphy was defined as, going beyond the broad pen, accepting the pointed pen, the brush, accepting people turning pens, rotating pens, doing things that were considered to be illegal if you read old calligraphy books. And then getting into the early parts of digitization, I mentioned some of the typefaces that came out of calligraphers specifically in the early days of digital type. And at the end of the 1990s with the Society of Scribes' 25th anniversary in 1990. The idea for the third event was to look at what's happened essentially in the 21st century, or more broadly since the internet in 1995, almost a 30-year period. And for this, I did not want to do a one-person lecture for a number of reasons. One, I haven't been as enmeshed in the calligraphy world since the late 90s as I used to be, so I'm not on top of everything, other than Christopher Calderhead's letterized review keeping me up to date with some things going on. But also, I just figured that things have gotten much broader, and it'd be better to have a group of people talk about what's been happening. They'll have different opinions in mind. I'm from a different generation, and they're also going to have different experiences. So what I've done for today is I've asked four people: David Chang, Jessie Fora. Oh no, I think I spelled your name wrong, Jessie, with an I. Keep wanting to do Fiora. It looks nice. We'll fix it later. Elinor Holland and Lynne. Um, and I came up with three broad topics that I wanted to explore. The first is continuing what was done in the second presentation, looking at the broadening of what calligraphy is considered to be. I think the word now almost has no very specific meaning, certainly not the ones you find in dictionaries. Um, and in that, so, whoops, oh, let's the screen change, sorry. Um, And then the second topic would be to look at the impact of the computer, its positive and negative effects. And the third is the impact of the internet. And so my idea is I'm going to introduce each of the sections with just a very short number of images, about 5, and hopefully a very short bit of commentary on my part, under 5 minutes, and then let the panelists talk for roughly 20 minutes so that the whole thing will run roughly an hour to an hour and a half, and then we can have any comments from the audience if I can figure out how to use the chat function on Zoom, and that should be it. So let me see if I can get my presentation opening up, and I got to find the share. Okay. Is everybody seeing only the presentation and not my full screen?
Yep, looks good.
Good. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I never know why. All right. So I'm the moderator, Paul Shaw, and that's me if you haven't already seen me on screen. Uh, and one example of my work from, I think, the early 90s. I can't remember now when I did this. This is a second version of it. It was originally one color as a letterpress print and then a three color reduced version was made for offset printing. The panelists are David Chang, who is an artist and calligrapher. And I chose David, or rather, Anna Pinto heavily recommended David because David's working in a variety of ways that often intersect with what's called asemic calligraphy, or calligraphy that doesn't have any specific meaning or legibility, as well as doing more art-based calligraphic work. David's in New York. Everybody here is local. Oh, David. And here's a sample of his work I pulled from his website. Jessie Fora, apologize for always wanting to add that I and make it a very Italian name. Jessie, artist and calligrapher, both in Philadelphia and New York. And I came across her work at the Society of Scribes annual exhibition and got interested because she was doing hand lettering, which is one of the areas that calligraphy has expanded into, overlapping what used to be seen as a separate realm, realm of lettering, that is drawing letters versus writing letters. And she brings, of course, the world of tattooing into our discussion. Here's Jessie and a sample of her work.
Mm.
Wanted Elinor Holland on the panel because one of the key things is talking about getting beyond the Latin alphabet. Looking at how calligraphy has not only broadened its interest since the 70s beyond italic and foundational hand and Roman capital and uncial to things like Carolingian and Beneventan and black letter, but also beyond Latin alphabets to an interest in Asian, Arabic, Hebrew, and Elinor is a trained Arabic calligrapher. There's a sample of her work combining Arabic calligraphy with more familiar italic. And finally, Lynne Yun. She brings to the table is a variety of lettering skills, but also a lot of digital techniques and abilities. She's a type designer, and she's now running, I think it is a type education website. Here's a picture of Lynne. And here is a screen grab from her website that gives you a little bit of an idea of her versatility. You can see a little bit of her calligraphy there in the far right cut off, type designed by her on the far left, and some lettering in the center. There's other stuff on her website that in a screen grab didn't look very exciting, so I settled for this. So part one, beyond the Latin alphabet. And just a couple of samples. Those who may not be familiar, this is an example of Chinese calligraphy, Metropolitan Museum of Art. An example of Japanese calligraphy. Some traditional Arabic calligraphy. I think it's spelled, but Elinor can correct me if I've got style wrong. Hebrew, which is not being represented today, but it is another non-Latin alphabet that's been of interest to people. And then asemic. And if you don't know Asian calligraphy, you might think this is, but according to the website this came from, this is just totally marks on paper. So that's where we're going to stop and share. I'll get back to my notes. So there are two things that I see in the shift away from the Latin alphabet. One is an interest in Asian calligraphy, especially brush. The impact of the brush is very different from that of the broad pen and pointed pen that dominate Western calligraphy. Though a broad tool is the tool behind Arabic and Hebrew calligraphy, and even some Indic calligraphies, which I didn't show. And then the other aspect of that, which I didn't include in the images, is the fact that calligraphers, people in outside of the West, have been interested in Western calligraphy. There's been a Japanese calligraphy society going back to the late 80s, I believe, and we're finding, excellent calligraphers working in a Western tradition coming from Thailand and other places that we would not normally expect. So there's been sort of a interchange in both directions. But the people here, Elinor and David and Lynne, certainly can speak to the interest in non-Western calligraphy. So I'm going to open it up, and I guess I have to unmute people. So Elinor and David and Lynne, maybe we can start with Elinor and just ask how Elinor got involved in Arabic calligraphy in the first place.
I went to Istanbul. I wanted to go to, unusual places. I still like to go to unusual places. And I had an opportunity to go to Istanbul when I was a teenager. And I saw, even though they don't speak Arabic in Turkey, and the Turkish is no longer written in Arabic script. It used to be written in Arabic script, but it's still the imprint artistically, everywhere I went. I saw this just beautiful script. I just was very attracted. I always liked line drawing. I'd been interested in calligraphy, but I'd never seen a class. Anyway, that's where I just was like, I want to do that. And I mean, that was a long time ago. I was unaware of the fact that there was at least one prominent teacher who's still alive, there that I could have stayed and studied with. I mean, I was just there for, like 6 weeks. And I would have done that had I known. But I came back and I tried to, like, there was nothing here. There was one book, and by this guy Safadi, and it wasn't like a book you could copy from. So, and I didn't know anything about the tools and the materials, and I was trying to do it on my own, but I got nowhere. So I started studying the Arabic language, figured what the heck, and eventually heard about this guy named Mohamed Zakariya in Northern Virginia and called him up and asked him. He had studied with that Turkish master who I didn't know about when I was in Turkey, and he had mostly studied through the mail. So I started studying with Zach, and we mostly worked through the mail because it's quite a schlep down there. I mean, it's not like I could go see him every week. And stop me, Paul, if I'm going in directions you're not interested in. But he was Can't hear you, Paul.
I was saying, just finish, how you studied with Zechariah.
Well, the thing is, his teacher, like, I ended up in this very traditional kind of classical method of, Islamic calligraphy, just because he was the only teacher there, where you follow this curriculum that developed like over 1,000 years ago, and you get a certification, you get like a diploma when you've reached the point where your teacher feels you're proficient. It's not like, it doesn't mean you're a master. It just means you're proficient. And what it kind of means also is that you teach. It's because money does not exchange hands in this system. That's one of the things that I think is so beautiful about it is I never paid Zach. And I have students now. If I'm doing a class, yes, I get paid. But if I'm working with a student one-on-one and they're getting their diploma, of which I have one student now in that category, she shouldn't pay me anything. And I shouldn't accept money from her because she's gonna, once she gets her diploma, she will teach as well. And I will just say that it reminds me of that Master Penman program where when your teacher feels you're proficient, you do a piece and you can copy an old piece of a great master. There's like a lot of famous lines of calligraphy that people copy from each other, kind of like classical music. So the student does the piece and then and I'll get another teacher to sign and say this person has my permission to get their diploma.
Was it what I had in mind in this part of this section, but you're talking about copying as something that's perfectly legitimate and part of their tradition, and that is something I believe is also true of Asian calligraphy. Is that right, David?
Yeah, that's correct. They look at a lot of the masters for reference, a lot of the um yeah, just a lot of the classical references, but then they take a much I guess a more expressionistic attitude towards it, later on towards mastery.
But copying is considered something that is part of the educational process, right?
Correct. Yep.
But can I just ask, I mean, that's the same in Latin script too. I mean, my first class, I got an exemplar and I tried to copy it.
Right.
But there's often a difference I find in the West where, somebody does a work and when somebody else says, oh, you copied somebody else's, and they complain about it. When that is, to me, how you learn. You
Yeah.
imitate. Did you learn? I mean, I don't know your training, David. Did you Chinese calligraphy in the traditional way?
Um, I guess my entry into calligraphy was more from the penmanship side. It's the first time I ever seen a calligraphy tool or even seen calligraphy. And so,
You don't have any background in Chinese calligraphy. Yours is all
no, 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 I don't have any, I've met a couple times with a master in terms of pointing me towards or citing the text of what they studied. But other than that, no real like a formal training with a master.
Lynn, what is your background in that regard?
Well, I have I guess my childhood, I grew up going back and forth between like Nashville, Tennessee and Daejeon, South Korea. And so for parts of elementary, parts of middle school, and the entirety of high school, I was in Korea. And the curriculum did involve so brush calligraphy for Chinese characters because Korean was written in the like the Chinese characters up until like about like 500 years ago. So like a lot of the traditional work is done with what you would consider Chinese calligraphy. And a lot of the work was when you're learning, it is copying, but I suppose like that was to me in line with painting as well, because when you're learning how to paint, you like sort of recreate works of like the so-called like classics, right? Like you're like studying like light composition and you try to like like just mimic a Rembrandt or whatever. And so to me, it felt like it was like along the same veins where you were trying to recreate like a classic painting.
Yeah, thank you. Um, we, we don't have anybody who is familiar with calligraphers in Japan because I'm interested in that idea that there are a number of Japanese calligraphers, some of whom have moved to the United States, who are really incredibly proficient in Western calligraphic styles. Uh, and I see the work, in Carl Rohrs's Alphabet and in Letter Arts Review. Just look at my notes. Oh, I know. I wanted to ask, since David, I showed your work, and I assume that that piece has no specific meaning, no legibility, right?
Oh, actually, that piece was a commission for a church. And so they just selected some verses that were important to them. And so I use text. Actually, text is I'm informed a lot. And I do the letters and the gestures are informed by the the Western characters. But
Is 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 the work considered to be legible? Is it does
it's
that
loose.
matter?
Yeah, loosely. Like I play around with certain words, maybe, or I'll highlight certain areas that I want more legibility, maybe kind of attention, given attention to.
I know I should find the image, just look at it again because I chose this because it appealed to me visually.
Yeah, I'm informed a lot by the like the textures of the city.
Find it. Let me see if I can share it again. All right. You said this is coming from what, Luke
A
in the Bible?
scripture. Yeah, I wish I could remember the which verse it was from, but it's all from scripture. Like if you hone in on some of where
I can see the
or
word
the
of,
gestural marks are, you can kind of re make out some of the like letter forms.
here. I can see, I guess, WHOS, whose. Oh, there's E. And I think love down here at the bottom.
Yeah.
Un
I'm trying to look at it on my phone right now.
One of the things that was coming up, and this is during the second presentation I did, was that in the by the 90s, there were people in the calligraphy world who were very interested first in abstract calligraphy, people trying to sort of replicate what had happened in painting in the 1950s in the United States. This was, I mean, something Thomas Ingmeier was probably the first person really to be talking about this, but there was Stephen Skaggs and I think Laurie Doctor and a number of other people, Denise Locke, Monica Dango, who sort of went from an interest in making the calligraphy abstract and possibly not legible and not caring, to then being interested in what people call asemic writing, that is, writing that has no meaning, even if it has very specific characters. Unlike that one sample where's the sample that I pulled off the web?
I'm sorry. I should have also mentioned a lot of my formal training comes from this place called Cheerio, and a lot of the teachers that went taught there. So Brody and Eve, like they were a big influence.
I'll come back to that in a minute, David. So I showed this example. I pulled off line as asemic writing because to me, it could be some sort of Asian calligraphy since I have no ability to read
Sure.
Chinese, Japanese, Indian continent scripts or Thai. Um, and yet, calligraphy, if you look online, includes things where the characters are perfectly legible but not understandable. If that makes sense. And I just wondered what any of you have how how you view this aspect of the way calligraphy has shifted over the years, whether
I think
some
it's exciting because just recently there's a Taiwanese calligrapher. She did this huge kind of installation at the Met. It'll be up till April, and it was her expression of I forget what the commission was for, but I think it's a beautiful example of someone like a master uh, bringing that abstraction element to writing. And so something as old as Chinese tradition can still uphold and honor more of this lineage of it doesn't have to be read, but just the idea of what calligraphy serves as, not just for legibility's sake, but something that can go beyond, maybe perhaps even more of an existential kind of purpose, one that can just um, bring connection, meaning, that type of more of that type of element into the writing experience and what calligraphy itself could serve as. I think that's the part that excites me the most.
um, I just went to the Met's website and the woman's name is, if I'm pronouncing it right,
Yeah,
and there's a splash page photograph showing two of the works in the rotunda in the Great Hall,
that's
and
right.
they look quite lovely. I mean, and as for me as a Westerner, I would not know that they're not legible to somebody
Yeah,
who's either Taiwanese or Singaporean
yeah.
or
And that's the beauty is I think the Western audience, because of it's catching up to how to read uh, and appreciate uh, calligraphy as simply just beautiful, writing from a standpoint of composition, line, texture, all those elements. Maybe not just legibility, but the artistry of, the rhythm and the movement. All those things are kind of, the language of abstraction. I mean, that's kind of what she is touching on. Like it's not so much about the legibility, but the beauty and the immediacy of what she's doing, and also the spirit that she's trying to evoke or embody.
what what people like Brody and Ingmar and others were advocating back in the 90s was thinking of calligraphy in terms of mark making and gesture, and you mentioned rhythm, David, and in the sense of the musicality,
Yeah.
or I don't know who first came up with the dance of the pen. I think actually it was like Alfred Fairbank of all people, but I know
Mm.
our took up that phrase for one of his books in the 80s. Uh, and it's not simply the dance with the pen, obviously, it's the dance with the brush as well. How do you feel about this, Elinor? I mean, you're working in a very traditional area. I mean, you talk about the master and the student, and then the student becomes the master, has their own student. And so there's a very much more sort of controlled tradition to the.
Yeah, in this country, I mean, if you go to Turkey, there's more of a sort of tradition and judgment and all that kind of stuff. But here, this is America, and we can do what we want. But I would say for me personally, and I think for a lot of calligraphers, when you get that training, you know, I I'm never going to start creating my own letter forms. Although I've messed with it. So I shouldn't say that. But I
I had it.
will just apply those letter forms in alternate, like writing on different kind of surfaces and yeah, using different kinds of tools. But I'm going to kind of stay true to the uh,
What I was trying to get at, Elinor, in Arabic calligraphy, we hear about the basic rules laid down by Ibn Muqla, and at the same time, if you're in, as you said, in Istanbul, you see all these ways in which people have been able to extend, distort, to change the letter forms to fit, on the side of buildings.
yeah,
And
that's still in keeping with Ibn Muqla.
so,
There is
so
a lot of flexibility with Arabic. That's one of the beauties of Arabic. There's so much, like you can stretch, you can squeeze, and there's all this intermingling. I mean, such as this piece here, whether these are words or not. But there's like weaving, a whole sort of tradition of weaving. And there's also, I'll just say, like a whole tradition of what they call hurufi, which means letters in Arabic. And it's more in keeping like with what David does. There may be a theme, there may be a text, but it's much more free form. That is one tradition that's out there. I don't know that I could do that. It would take a lot for me just because of and yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking
Oh,
about
I just wanted to like hop in and say like asemic calligraphy is getting more popular, but I think it's just asemic writing as a genre in general. I think like there is like a rising interest in asemic writers, who are obviously not calligraphers or but who are writing like I think I've seen a lot of like Mirtha Dermisacci work getting much more popular in recent days, although I think she was most active in 60s or 70s, I believe. And I think back then, I don't think she ever said so, but I think like her idea was that like she would make these compositions of newspapers almost, but the writing was illegible. And like the notion that people read into it was that she was like sort of rebelling against the regime, but she didn't want to obviously like say that outright. So like that was like a political statement that people thought she was making, although I don't know, people can correct me. I don't think it was ever confirmed. And I think like nowadays there is this resurged interest because we're living in the information age where there's so much content. And so maybe I think like a lot of like computational folks as well are computational poets, like people who might work a lot with text and are able to manipulate lines like digitally, or like sort of looking back upon their work, like and sort of like thinking about like if we're bombarded with so much copy and text, like what meaning does that have? And perhaps like trying to extract what might be the most like graphically applicable thing that they want to like point out is like is if you're not actually reading the book, is the texture of the book what is like interesting to you, like for example. And I think like that's like the rise in interest in asemic calligraphy is like part of like a bigger wave of interest in asemic things. Yeah.
Texture, I mean, it's all about texture and about rhythm and about, there's like it's kind of like music. My teacher used to always say it's music for the eyes. Calligraphy is music for the eyes. So you can just pull it down to just the texture, the rhythm. And, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just because it's the line. The fact that there's meaning is like just adds to it, you know? Or you can start with the meaning. I mean, it's up to you, but you can look at it from both ways, I think.
I'm going to move on to the second one. I mean, we can talk at length about all these ideas. That's what's so interesting is that calligraphy, using the word in quote marks, has gotten so broad that it's, crossing into areas in the art world, the literary world, as Lynne mentions. We obviously know the digital world. But I want to move on and let me go back to my second part. My back on screen.
The hand
Thank you.
versus the computer.
Yeah, it's a pretty predictable dichotomy. But I pulled this thing together. I wasn't spending a lot of time on catchy phrases. But actually, what I'm thinking about here is the fact that when the computers began to really show up in the 90s, for me at least, that was the heyday of my work commercially. I mean, the more people were using computers, the more I was asked to do calligraphic work. And not just calligraphic work, but work that was deliberately rough and inept. People wanted to prove that it was done by hand, that it wasn't a font. Uh, and that, kind of went away after a while. But it keeps coming back, the idea of the hand. One of the things that began to occur back then, especially in the 21st century, is an interest among calligraphers in all types of mark making that wasn't traditional calligraphy, whether Western or Eastern. Graffiti became something people were fascinated by, and then graffiti artists began to become calligraphers, like Luca Barcellona and Hans Schues Mühlmann and what was the third guy? Oh, Victor Kams. So we've got this interesting crossover, and of course, with the interest in the hand, people began doing more focused on drawing and hand lettering. There was Jessica Hisch's famous, what was it, Initial a Day project that she did for years that I think sparked lots of interest. Ina Salt did several books on tattoos, and maybe, I don't know if that's where Jessie's interest might have come from either of those people, but tattooing began to cross over, graffiti artists. On the other side of it, so this is graffiti that I found online. It doesn't look like what you would expect. It's part of a Flickr page, and they listed the names of the graffiti artists. It must be a collective. There were like 5 of them involved. But I mean, if I just look at this, I would never even thought this was graffiti, other than you can see the effect of a spray can. I mean, aesthetically, this could be modern art. It could be all sorts of stuff. This is Luca Barcellona, and it's not graffiti as we think of it. It's calligraphy, but Luca came out of a graffiti group and became a well-known calligrapher. And here he was asked to sort of go backward by Carhartt. I think that's real graffiti on the left. Who did that? Francois Chastanet is a Frenchman I met about a year ago who's been researching graffiti styles, especially in the United States. There's a new tiny little booklet out about Philadelphia style, and inspired by Chinese, I guess it's called water painting. He has done a workshop in either France or Belgium, I forget which, with people to do water painting. That is, you dip these brushes into water and then write on the ground. But this is getting people back into realizing that writing is a physical activity, that it is open to everybody. You don't have to be a master calligrapher to do this. And then we've got the effect of the computer giving calligraphers new ways of working or learning calligraphy. This is 2 screen grabs from a website showing you how to use Photoshop to do calligraphy. That never occurred to me. I was thinking of Illustrator. It didn't occur to me you could do it in Photoshop, but I guess you can. You can do all sorts of things in these programs that I'm not familiar with. And then what I expected more to be looking for was the fact that you can do calligraphy with tablets. And And here's a sample from, I think, from an Adobe website showing how you can have a broad pen effect, even though the pen you're using on your tablet is not broad. It has a point, but you can choose different types of pen strokes. And one of the questions years ago, and probably not so controversial anymore, is this calligraphy? If you're not actually working with your physical hands, ink and paper, is it still calligraphy? My last image, I think so. Yeah. So among the things I'd like to ask you guys about, is what are we calling calligraphy now? I mean, is there a problem with the fact that it includes tattooing and graffiti and things made on a tablet or letters that have been modified in programs like Illustrator or Photoshop, where people have scanned in stuff made directly with pen and ink and paper, but the final result that they're showing or isn't is a combination. You want to start, Jessie? We haven't heard from you today.
Sure. I mean, I work with a tablet daily for my job. It makes things like making line drawings easier. It also allows me to go back and forth with my clients, quickly to see, what they like, what they don't like. But I mean, I wouldn't be the one to ask about like if it's like okay still to call this calligraphy. I mean, I guess in a perfect world, I would say, of course, yes, it's a calligraphy in some ways. I mean, I have calligraphy background. I've studied calligraphy, with many people, and so I understand the letter forms. I know how to create them. I know how to make them with pen and ink. I also know how to draw them. Yeah, I mean, how I tattoo is, that concept of, making it look like it was done with a tool, so I have to tattoo it. Or, some would like paint it, but I'm tattooing it to make it look like it was done with a specific tool. So whether that's like a brush or whether that's a pen and a nib or just a big pen, that sort of forced lettering is something that I do daily. And so I guess I would consider that still calligraphy in some ways, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I would have to kind of defer to people that have been doing this longer than myself, to see if that would still be considered calligraphy in their eyes,
It just occurred to me as you're mentioning tattooing that, one area where, you still have to be doing things with real tools is tattooing. It's still going to be ink and skin.
Yes.
Digital tattooing.
Yeah. So yeah, but I have to make it look like it was done with a brush, like a brush or a pen. So it's while it's still, yes, a physical tool, I'm doing it with the illusion that it was painted on in some way. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Paul, what would you consider, like, would you consider that calligraphy? Like, I see some of your lettering for the titles up here, like that would be more hand lettering, right?
I've been complaining about the abuse of the word calligraphy for about 40 years. So,
I see.
what's happened in the digital world, it was already happening. I mean, what
Yeah.
you're seeing in my presentation is a typeface called Erotica by Maximiliano Roviero from Brazil, which is a brilliantly designed typeface based on
Yeah, very nice.
really the sort of work that Tony DeSpina and others did 70s and 80s. That was drawn letters that were, following the pointed pen letters of Bickham, but with an exaggeration in the thick stroke.
Mm.
argue with Tony, who would say, this is Spencerian. And I'd say, no, it's not. Spencerian is done with a pointed pen, and
Yeah.
we on letters. But he'd tell me, no, Herb says it's Spencerian, therefore it's Spencerian.
Yeah, I actually,
And then,
that
in fact,
was
I almost
one of
used
my,
Tony.
yeah, that was one of my biggest questions was why, because the studio I work in, they do, it's half design, half tattooing, and they do everything with like typography and, branding and all that stuff. So they work with lettering quite often, and what they refer to as Spencerian is not something I've ever worked with. So I was just always curious like where that crossover happens, and
Blame it on
you
Herb
know what was that?
Blame it on Herb Llewellyn.
Okay, I'll blame him. Yeah, that
mean,
makes sense.
You were asking me about what my view is, and I've given up on trying to explain what calligraphy ought to be, because even if
Sure.
you think about it in the early days of the society, calligraphy technically means beautiful writing, and we
Mm,
often say, oh, look at that ugly calligraphy, which is ridiculous.
right.
I mean, it's cartography is ugly writing. So it's like words change. Like I don't get upset
Yeah.
about word font, in certain ways. But one thing that I do get upset about is there's a difference between type and lettering and calligraphy. Things that are pre-made and things that are handmade.
Right. Yeah, that
And,
makes sense.
uh,
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
that's okay. I want to see what Lynne has to say about this, because I mean her career is certainly crossing over into these areas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because yeah, as Paul mentioned, like calligraphy is the art of beautiful writing. But I think as like it gets easier and easier to do these crossovers, like for example, if you have a pre-made like letter form such as like, you take something from a digital typeface like a font and then like you like sort of embellish a little bit onto it like with like an iPad, is that now lettering? I mean, like, right? Like, so like there, but it's becoming easier and easier to do these crossover things. So I find that as I teach like these days, I have to like sort of tell people, yes, there's calligraphy, lettering, and typeface. And I think like typeface is just because they come pre-packaged in like a font file these days digitally. Like it's a little bit easier to say like this is a typeface because it comes in a font that you can install. But I think lettering and calligraphy is getting a little bit more of a spectrum that like you have to be like this was written by hand on paper, like unmodified, like just literal strokes. This is 100% calligraphy. And like this is lettering where it was like this is 100% lettering where it was built up with a pencil and then like you traced it perfectly with like pen and ink. But and then like there's all these in between where like this is calligraphy where somebody later on wouldn't like modify these little flourishes here and there in Photoshop, and now it's like somewhere in between. Yeah, so becomes harder and harder to really put these things into like buckets, I think.
Let me jump in there, Lynn, because what's interesting is, you're right about, this spectrum and these gray areas. And the thing is, they existed before the computer. I mean, most of my work has been commercial calligraphy. So, I've written it out and then I have retouched it with white paint. I have cut up letters and taped them together. All sorts of, analog tricks of the trade, and then photostated or scanned, and there's my finished piece. And there were people who wouldn't consider that calligraphy. I've told the story probably several times. In the early 80s, I was in charge of an exhibition for the Society of Scribes called Calligraphy and the Graphic Arts. And the idea was to celebrate people doing commercial work. Well, the first show turned out to be kind of a disaster. We had top judges, Milton Glaser, Charles Pearce, a top British calligrapher living in the US, and Lou Strick, who ran the Pentalic Publishing and Calligraphy Supply Company. Milton Glaser was so powerful, he convinced the other two guys that calligraphy had to be written directly. And so anything that he thought would look like it was written directly, even though this was all reproduced work, was acceptable. Anything that didn't match what he thought was direct calligraphy was out. He threw out John Stevens, Sheila Waters, Julian Waters. I mean, the biggest name in the show was a guy named Jim Gibbs from Oklahoma. Nobody ever heard of the guy. Never heard of him since. His work was simply large broadsides of dense text in a perfectly fine italic, nothing, great, nothing terrible. He had like 7 pieces in the show, including one that got us into trouble because it included swear words, which somebody discovered by reading the entire thing. It was legible. There's an advantage to illegibility, you must discover. Anyway, I mean, after that, we changed the name of the show to Calligraphy and Lettering and the Graphic Arts because the whole point with anything reproduced, you have no idea whether it's direct or not. You don't know. I mean, even things that looked rough or ragged, I mean, if anybody's ever taken a Michael Clark class, there's all these tricks to making rough edges, to making letters look like they got bumps in the middle. And so, the idea of, modifying your stuff in Photoshop or Illustrator, is that any different from white paint and tape? Anybody wants to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, when I've been taking calligraphy classes for quite a while, but it wasn't until I took Lynne's class at Cooper, that I was really introduced to the world of hand lettering. I didn't really know that there was such a dramatic difference with the two, but it also kind of inspired one another, and everything was based on those traditional calligraphy forms, and so taking Lynne's class was really helpful in opening up my eyes into the world of hand lettering. So so thanks, Lynne. But
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like it's one of those things where I think as we work like and have to pay the bills and do commercial work, I think it's harder and harder to get into these like strict buckets and classifications, I think, because like these days, like a lot of folks work on the iPad because it is the quickest way to make edits for the client. And so like I think like it's one of those things if we like we as an at least like me, if I start saying like, oh, what you're doing on the iPad is not calligraphy, like I might end up inadvertently discouraging students from pursuing writing, right? Like even so like, if like calligraphy on the iPad, I think is still calligraphy. In the sense where like if folks want to like practice writing with like an Apple Pencil, and yes, of course, there's like a lot of limitations like the tilt and changing the nib, like these are all like inferior compared to a literal physical tool. But I think if we consider that just as like a spectrum, and this is just like, this is like just trying to do beautiful writing with a marker as opposed to like an actual broad nib tool. And if we just like kind of classify it there, I think it helps to just be a little bit more like open with the interpretation because people will have to do it for their commercial work anyway, like for practical reasons.
But I have not worked with a tablet, though I think I bought one years ago. It's one of many things I buy and then never use. Can is Other things you can do with the pen tools on the tablet that you cannot do with a traditional uh, pen? Other digital things you can do that are different. You're saying that there's limitations, but there must be some things that are additional.
Yeah, these are like if you ask me 3 years from now, it will be vastly different because I feel like technology keeps changing over and over. I know Apple just released like a new generation of their Apple Pencil that I have not personally used, but I've heard from like Jackson Alves, the calligrapher, that like the tilt is way better than it used to be. So like it used to be that like there was pressure sensitivity, like obviously like up and down, but like the tilt wasn't that great. But apparently now the tilt is a lot better, so you can emulate like a broad brush where like it's like tilting in certain angles. And like I know like people have started to like do painting, which probably means you can also do calligraphy and like VR, the virtual reality space, like painting in 3D, right? Yeah, so you can like write in 3D presumably. So like there's all these things that you can do. But yeah, it's right now, like if we're looking at like the classic like graffiti spray paint thing, where like you can shoot a paint from different kind of angles and get a certain splatter, change out the caps, and like, calligraphy where like you're changing out like different densities of the ink and different kind of nibs and all these different things. Like of course it's still inferior. But like that being said, there's like different things that are coming out with it, and it's all uncharted territory. Yeah.
Kind of give me an idea. I mean, I kind of ignore a lot of these things like the meta virtual reality giant goggle things. But if you're in that space, could you actually be doing, let's say, physical calligraphy, like standing against the wall, and writing? I mean, spray painting, whatever.
Yeah, I think there was a demo of a VR painting tool that went viral where it was like Disney artists like who were like creating characters like in 3D, like almost like they were sculpting. And like you can imagine like a flower like kind of being drawn in like real time where you could kind of like see it in real space. And we're getting to a point where like things like 3D printing and such are getting like more and more affordable for people to just do at home, right? So this is like not a thing right now, but like what's to say in like 10 years, like doing 3D calligraphy and then printing it out and having it like, like easily available is going to be a thing. Like, no idea. But I'm just saying that like it's still developing. But
That's
yeah.
something which I didn't really explore in the last talk or even plan on today is people interested in turning letter forms into 3 dimensions. Julia Vance, sculptor in Norway, has been profiled a number of times in Letter Exchange and Letter Arts Review. And I saw online that Brody Neuenschwander is doing jewelry. And those are kind of, obvious things. But yeah, I mean, thinking of letter forms in a 3 dimensional way is another aspect of how calligraphy has expanded over the recent decades. Before we move on to the third section, is anything David or Elinor wanted to say?
I mean, the only, my kind of comment is, you know, I have an idea of like how to categorize all these things, but really it doesn't matter. Like everything has crossover, right? There's always crossover. It's a natural, it's a human thing.
Mm.
We're not you can't strictly define everything. And personally, I have no need to do that. But anyway, that's my only comment.
Yeah, I also wanted to say like the world that I'm in, like it's very a lot of tattooers used to be graffiti artists, and they do a lot of lettering for their work daily. And a lot of their tattooing is inspired by a lot of like black letter or you know um copper plate, but it's interesting that they don't know that they're doing that, and now they're like I see more and more that those folks are like trying to go backwards and like learn all of that stuff now, kind of like how I did it. I mean, I've been a tattooer longer than a calligrapher, really. So they're like I had somebody who's pretty well known in the tattoo industry for their lettering, just messaged me and asked me about like how would they go about becoming a master penman, and I was like, how do you even know that? That's so crazy. Like it's so cool that they're all trying to find out, where it all came from.
All right, I'm going to move on. Thank you, Jessie. Let's see if this third thing shows up. All right, the internet is obviously broad, and there's a lot of things we can say. What a couple of things that I had in mind. One is what the internet has allowed calligraphers to do is to create videos and teach to people remotely. I mean, Elinor talked about learning Arabic by mail. with Mohamed Zakariya, but I think Dennis Brown might have been the first calligrapher I remember who began doing videos, I think in the 1990s. This is the screen grab from YouTube of one he has in Roman capitals. You can see there's a bunch of other ones. I'm not quite sure what monkey calligraphy is.
Hey, Paul, can you share your screen?
Oh, I thought I was sharing. I'm sorry. I must have unshared it. All right, let's go back to sharing the screen. My are we back?
Yeah.
Bond? Sorry about that. I wonder why I wasn't seeing any people. Uh, anyway, Dennis Brown, I think, was the first calligrapher who got into making videos a long time ago. A number of people have YouTube sites today. I just, picked Dennis's out. And so calligraphers, this is one positive thing about the internet is being able to reach people all over the world, as well as to archive the sense you're teaching and have it be at one moment, but the videos will last as long as you leave them up. Another, of course, is having websites to promote your work. This is Denise Locke, and that I believe is asemic. I think so. That piece of work on her splash page. Now, along with having your own website, a lot of people have put their work up on Behance and Instagram and Facebook and Flickr, so that people can constantly refresh and show what they've been up to, including work in progress or ideas, sometimes with feedback. The society, of course, have websites. I was embarrassed at how terrible almost all of them looked. The only one that looked decent, I was on the splash page, the Society of Scribes and Illuminators, which would be the last group I would have expected to have a good-looking website. What, much to my surprise, when I was doing a search for calligraphy, the first society whose name shows up online is the Society of Scribes on page 6 of my Google results. And by page 20, no other society had shown up. So we may not have the best looking website, but somehow we are getting some of the top hits, I have to say, which is very refreshing. Society of Scribes Illuminators did not show up in the top 20, either did any of the other societies that I looked for directly. But what's the advantage of societies having websites is not only letting people know about events, but being able to have members from farther away. The SOS, when we started in the 70s, grew rapidly as we had members across the United States. And then when people began to realize that there were local societies sprouting up, many people, quit being a member of the SOS, because why, if you're in Montana, and can't come to an event, you need to be a member when you can be a member of the Big Sky Scribes. But now you could be a member and you could, do online talks like when we're doing today, or online classes. And so I think this is one of the best things that's happened with the internet and with Zoom, being able to spread the teaching of calligraphy. Some odd things that I found online. I was going to do a whole thing on modern calligraphy, which I didn't, first came to my attention about 10 years ago when people in I think CLAS, the Calligraphy and Lettering Arts Society in England, began moaning and groaning about modern calligraphy, and I had no idea at first what they were talking about. Then I realized it was all this bouncy stuff. And I got equally upset about it, and I thought, wait a minute, in the 1990s, I did an entire talk about what is quality in calligraphy, because there was all this crappy calligraphy happening then. So what's the difference, especially with a lot of stuff in the 90s, looked like the stuff from the 2010s. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to weigh in on the class debate over this. It's just another phase. But I was so surprised to find foligraphy online. This might just be a one-off. There was like a blog And when I tried to, when I went and followed the blog link, I found this image here, which basically is telling you how to make modern calligraphy by drawing. Right, Lynn? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah.
Writing a basic skeleton, and then you're simply adding, what they call shading or filling in the gaps. This is how the double pencil approach of Edward Johnston used to work, right? Not all that weird, or down or diminishing calligraphy. My last image, though, is I hadn't thought of what I was planning this. I don't know why I hadn't, because it's now 2024. Oh, somebody has a typo there. Tutorial Queen. Even
I can't see
my last image is that is AI generated according to Adobe. Adobe calls it asemic calligraphy. And there's actually several of these online. And they look pretty good, I have to say. You even have a little sense of the brush density. So the last thing to be interested in what's happening now, and I don't know if it's really the internet, I guess it's software, is the impact of AI, which, in the design world, everybody's kind of getting bent out of shape about it. I'm kind of ignoring it, but I'm curious as to, is this going to, get rid of us as calligraphers, or is this going to be a new tool for us to use? Or is it just sort of a curiosity? All right, that's the last of my images. So I'd like to ask people first. We'll start with, I guess all of you have websites, right? Because I know I found Lynne's and David and Jessie's work today on their website. So you have Facebook or Instagram pages. So how are they working for you? I mean, what do they do? How successful are they? Elinor is laughing.
Well, I mean, don't quote me on this. I just think Instagram is stupid, but that's because I'm extremely old school and I know I need to be on Instagram, and I'm a little bit on Instagram, and like my daughter bugs me and posts things on Instagram for me. But yeah, I'm not using social media the way I should. I would be much more successful if I used it better, but I can't. I'm just an old lady now. Like I just don't. I'm not going to spend my time doing that.
Elinor, I'm not on Instagram, but partly because I don't like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and he owns Instagram. But you say you could be more successful and you should do it. Well, why should you do it? What do you think you would achieve if you were willing to,
Well, this is what my students and my children tell me, that and I see it's true that artists keep posting all the time their stuff. So they're circulating, their name is out there, their artwork is out there, and people will sign up for their classes, and people will, commission pieces, or, it depends on what field you're in. I mean, I'm mostly teaching and doing commissions, but really I'll do anything, as long as it's not immoral or illegal and is involved with lettering. And the weirder, the better. But I've been told that to be successful, to get a lot of work, to get clients, to get business, you should be out on social media. And I just
remind me, Elinor, of a statement a student made in my last calligraphy class in 2015 at Parsons. The student said, you could be famous if you were on Instagram. And the next week, he came into class and said, "Oh, I went online and discovered you're famous."
Yeah. No, I mean, I had a gig recently that came from my Instagram. So that was good. So yeah, I should learn something and keep posting more regularly. But this like me, it just goes against my grain.
David, can I get you to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I purely see it as just like another marketing tool or just a tool to get access to an audience before you had to rely maybe on you know, like an agent or someone to help, you got to pay them to get you those clients. Here you got access or the freedom to um, just to control your outreach. And so, um, I'm with Eleanor in terms of, I try to limit the whole like me thing. If you just get to a rhythm of just saying, oh, this would be good to use later on. But also there's a lot, I mean, I would suggest maybe just hiring someone just to handle that for you. There's a lot of people that will just gladly do that, focus
Yeah.
on that. And so I love it. I mean, I think it's great. And I think just purely seeing it as like a tool it's just a great way for people who really want to make a living out of doing this. Then it's kind of um, yeah, it's a very uh, cheap and effective way to get get clients.
Do you feel any pressure to continually post new work, or do you do it at your own pace?
Yeah, no, at my own pace, but it's I kind of have an understanding of try to at least have something new every week, but or just something different. But it's more like what it does is it really helps you to connect and create your audience, and then once you've developed your kind of your core audience, then you can just start speaking directly to them. But it's all those things kind of just, the whole immediacy you can get with just that connection part. It's yeah, it really removes those people in between that you had to rely on before.
Yeah, you've got a whole website with all sorts of stuff that I was looking at this morning.
Yeah, oh, think I froze for a second there. Yeah, I wanted to point out that I once like attended like a like a talk somewhere once, and this person was talking about social media and how like social media's role has changed. Where like before it used to, in the earlier days, it used to be discovery, like you would see people on your feed that you didn't know before, but now that it has gotten so big, like Instagram in particular has changed so that you see things from people you already follow. So it has like become like a tool to keep your followers like up to date rather than getting your work in front of new people. And so like it's kind of sorry.
Is it due to the company changing the algorithms, you think?
Uh, So sorry, could you repeat your question?
Is that because Instagram or Facebook or whoever has changed the algorithms? So they're just looping your own stuff back on you, sort of.
Oh, of course, because they want people to pay for advertising, right? Like it's like if like the algorithm did your advertising for you, why would anyone pay for it? So like of course they're like sort of blockading like new people from seeing it. And so this is a whole different thing. But I also think like there's like this shift in like folks where like I know a lot of people who are no longer subscribing to newsletters. Like they're like, I'm so tired of getting junk mail in my physical inbox and my digital inbox. So like people have swapped to like just using like social media feeds as a way to filter what they're getting when they want like, promotions or alternative content. Like a lot of people even like getting advertising on Instagram, for example. They're like, oh, like at least like these are ads that are relevant to me, or like these are clothes that I would want to buy, which is like kind of like a very big shift, I think. Um, and I also do think it's problematic that like a lot of the internet is just Instagram at this point. Like it's not, it used to be that there was like, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's all these other like, so, like social media things. Now TikTok's banned as of yesterday or whatever. And so I feel like it's problematic that like, Meta gets to control like this one social media platform that like almost everybody is on. Um,
Anybody, anybody using Behance to show work?
Yeah, Behance is also another thing. So I think like these are platforms where like certain people will use, like I know certain people will use Behance, certain people will use, like Dribble and all these different platforms. But I think the boon and the problem is that like there's no way for you to differentiate between like personal content and promotional content like anymore, right? It's like let's say for like a lot of like gigs that I get there are they are unfortunately through like social media because like a lot of these like art directors who might be friends or friends of friends, they're just scrolling social media in their like lunch break and they're like, oh, this person could be a good fit, right? Like it's like unfortunately like this is what happens. And it's, whether you like it or not, it's the world that we live in. I do definitely, because I am like social media poster. Sometimes I go like a month or two without posting, and I really, really do literally stop getting paid jobs. Like, and once I do start posting consistently again, I'll get something, and then I'll get busy, and it's a struggle, like Eleanor said, but like it really is like a thing where like you do start getting forgotten as a professional person looking for work if you stop posting. And I do think websites and all really help, but it only really helps like if people know to go there in the first place. Like it's like a tree fell in the forest, right? And it was like, and nobody heard it. Like if your website exists, but there's nothing to drive it there, it might as well not exist. Yeah, so it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. I'm just here with everybody else. Yeah.
That's a great point too. And somebody in the comments just said that they wouldn't have known about this lecture without social media. So it is like super important in that way to, advertise things like this for sure. And my job is like 100% fueled by social media, and I hate it. I started tattooing way before this and doing lettering way before this. Like I found out, about started taking classes with Kathy Malisi like years ago before, I was like on social media really. And so I finding out about this world before then. And then seeing how much it has grown is like wild. But relying on social media is really tough because if I don't post consistently or make myself present or make myself like, that I'm showing that I'm still like I'm still relevant or still doing things or interesting in some way, then people definitely forget about you and move on to the next person for sure.
Any of you taken used an online calligraphy video to learn, or have you actually made one to teach?
No.
Have we made a calligraphy video to teach online? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I just wonder if you have
Actually, I was thinking I hadn't, but I did make a couple videos for the New York Public Library, which at the beginning of the pandemic, which was a regular client I had doing these workshops for young adults. I mean, for tweens, really, around the Bronx and Manhattan. And when the pandemic started, dried up, and then they said, oh, make us a couple videos. And I did. And they were like, we'll pay you a certain amount every time we publish it. But that also dried up. It's Zoom, though. Teaching on Zoom has been, just teaching directly live Zoom has been a great boon to anybody who teaches, I think. I mean, not that I've taken a Zoom calligraphy class, but I've taught. I teach all the time on Zoom.
Do you record any of them for?
Yeah. Oh, well, I record and send it to the students.
But not to reuse.
No, because no, I haven't reused it. No.
Well, by doing that, your students, I'm assuming, are at a great distance, so that this allows you to teach people who aren't in the Hudson Valley area or New York.
Yeah, no, I mean, people all over the world. I did, yeah. I mean, I've taught people, I have a student in India and, people on the West Coast and people in Europe and people all over the place. It's not the ideal way, but like I would say it's slower, right? Because like, you can't see what a student, how they're holding their pen and, like you can't see the technical problems they may be having directly. You have to sort of see it in the work, which is a little slower. But, you know, I have people I've never met that have been taking classes with me for a long time.
Lynn, what's the new thing you had told me about you were doing?
Oh, yes. So I run a online type and design school called Type Electives with Juan Villanueva, who a lot of you might know. And it's definitely a case where a lot of students are taking classes from all over the world. And to be fair, it does work a lot better for what I would call like screen-based things. Like for example, like, doing drawing be like Bezier curves in a font software is easier because you're seeing the screen of someone else and you're also looking at the same thing. But like that being said, like that we have like sign painting classes and lettering classes and such, and it does allow instructors from different places in the world to learn from all, to and for students from all over the world to take their classes. And like speaking for myself, like I think one of the best things that I've done for myself for online learning is that I took a Hangul design class like by a type designer in Korea that was like 10 weeks. And that is sort of the kind of thing that would have never happened before the pandemic. Because like in Korea they're very even now, I think now that things are going back like in person, like the online classes have stopped, but there was a short window in which like folks were willing to teach online. And so like Hangul is like the Korean the written script. And like so like that is something that like is like not a trade secret, but people kind of like hold like close to their hearts. Like people don't make like a lot of like public lectures and such about designing Hangul because it's a very, very small industry, unlike Latin type, for example. Yeah, so like I was like, oh my gosh, like I will wake up at 2 in the morning to take this class because otherwise I would have never been able to take it. And yeah, so as Eleanor mentioned, like I'm sure these people in India are waking up at like 4 or 5 in the morning to take your classes. And like for some people who have never been able to have access to these things, it's a total boon. And but yes, I agree that it's a slower process.
It
You
is
have to sit
slower.
there with 5 cups of coffee. Yeah, like it's not ideal.
All right, we're getting close to 1:30. Has anybody had any uh, experience or thoughts about AI and how it might, interact with the calligraphy world, the lettering world, the world of letter forms and mark making?
I'm ignoring it like you because I think it's ultimately evil.
We want our audience to find people who are not ignoring it.
I mean, I'll just put it in here that I recently last fall I last no last spring last fall I forget the time, but like last year I taught a class on typography and AI, which I think is adjacent at Parsons. And so like what I was having
Oops.
students do was that like I had students and like make like 500 different A's, right? And then put it into an algorithm and see what like the computer spits back out after training it with 500 A's. And then they had the surprise where like, oh, it doesn't make anything new. And like, yes, I was like, because all it's doing it is extrapolating all the different ones that you made and making variations within them. So if you want to make things that are outside of this box, that are outside of the norm, that are like a personal expression or like, something that's like unique, that is like inherently really, really difficult, at least with like the level of AI that we have. So I think it's like good for me. I mean, so I'm thinking like, hey, like if somebody needs like just another meh, like out of the box, like kind of thing, then maybe it's okay. But if we're talking about like artful, considered, thoughtful work that is unique to like us as individual calligraphers and people, we are safe. for now.
Well,
That is
Yeah.
my take.
That white on black things were created. There's another one I found that was quite nice, which I don't have here. But I mean, those were, of course, were illegible and just mark making. So could you like feed a bunch of you were feeding A's to your from your students into the program? Suppose you're just feeding basic stroke shapes, maybe the basic strokes of Arabic. What could it create then? Or maybe the basic building strokes of Chinese characters. I mean, would it build actual ideograms that you could understand, or would it just build interesting looking shapes? I don't know.
I mean, I will say that like it's very good at recognizing common patterns, right? It's like the same idea where like if you feed it a picture of 10,000 different cats, it can make cat images for you. So like let's say for like as far as type, we have so many sans serifs of all different kinds, right, out in the world. So you could feed it like so the AI will be great for making like a very unremarkable middle of the mill sans serif typeface. And so that we would be excellent at. And in some regards, like maybe, I was like, not that AI is there yet, but I'm like, we all have those jobs where we know no creativity is needed. I might as well be using a font, but someone wants it handwritten, like, so maybe if there's those kind of really boring menial jobs, I think AI could potentially do the job. But like, again, like, I think like thinking outside of the box or something unique is like going to be really hard because that's inherently not what that's inherently not how computers learn because it just learns by recognizing patterns and rhythm. So yes, I think like asemic calligraphy perhaps could go far because if we're talking about giving it like 10,000 different pieces of asemic calligraphy that is very similar and say, hey, can you make something very similar? Yes. But like as it stands now, you can't create like new asemic calligraphy that you've never seen before. Like it's not going to happen.
If you give it things, you don't tell it make, asymmetric calligraphy. You just give it a bunch of strokes and say make them into some sort of pattern. But I was also just realizing that one of the images that I pulled from the internet but didn't use was a website that promises to do AI penmanship, or AI calligraphy. All it was just sort of ordinary handwriting and not particularly good looking, at least in the sample online.
Yeah, I mean, like it'll be good at doing like middle of the road. Like, I mean, as I keep saying, I think like AI can get very far with like just doing middle of the road, unremarkable, like okay things. But if we're considering like as Deborah said in the chat, like real art, like if we consider real art to be something where it's unique to every individual person, like it's gonna be hard. Although I guess you can ask it to make like three different cats in the shape of an A or something, but I don't know how that could be useful.
No, I'm really I'm learning something from you, Lynn. I'm really glad to hear this because like it's important to me that the human element is part of it because it makes it unique and all your years of experience go into it. And so that is my focus and AI is not. But I see now that AI, yeah, if you want to just do middle of the road, but we're calligraphy, we're lettering artists. We don't want to do middle of the road. But there might be a place where we would,
Right.
sometimes, yeah. Just get the job done.
It's about time for us to stop. So, are there any last minute comments from any of you? Jessie, David, we've heard Eleanor's sort of summation. I think Lynn's.
I guess I would say don't give up on social media. It's not totally going to ruin your life and to make you hate your job and all that stuff. Like it is useful in many ways. It's inspiring to see so many of you all, obviously, like especially all of your work and keep up with everybody, whatever he's doing. Yeah, Eleanor, David, Lynn, seeing what you all are and Paul, you're not on social media, but if you were, I'd say the same about you. It's great to see what you all are doing. And yeah, just don't give up on it. It is a tool, like David said, and you don't have to put what you're eating on there every day, but use it, for better or for worse. But
Also,
that's it.
my blog, but it's what I call a slow blog, and I've stuck to the slowness.
Yeah.
Started it. And I got off of Twitter when Musk said he was going to buy it. So that was the most I was ever on
Understandable. Yeah.
Twitter, once a month or so. But the whole point of today's event was not to have old fogies like myself or possibly young fogies like Elinor talk about way calligraphy is today, but to see that things have changed, and it doesn't mean it's all bad. As everything has got positive aspects to it. I can understand how you could definitely promote your work, as David said, without an agent or artist rep. Or having to pay for a page in the Black Book or some of the books that used to be published to, show to art directors to say, hey, here's what people do in the lettering world. It costs you $700 for some of those pages. That's free. If you're on Behance or Facebook or whatever.
Behance?
Behance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really know that because a lot of my students use it.
See, we learn from our students.
Anyway, this has been recorded. So I saw somebody said they wish their guild members in Kalamazoo, Michigan, my home state, would know about it. So I hope that woman tells her guild members and other guilds discover the recording, because this is not strictly about the Society of Scribes. It's a broader look at calligraphy, though you're hearing the viewpoints of members of the society. The second talk, which drew a huge audience of, I believe, 6 people back in October, we're going to panelists, I think, next Friday, and then once we do that, if it all works out, we'll post that online so that the second event will be available to everyone. The first one was recorded at the Grolier Club, and I believe it's already online. I apologize for the fact that near the end of that one of our members from the 70s and 80s got up and began doing a personal infomercial. So if you get to that part, you can skip ahead to the end. Robert Rubian was a former president of the society and an important member in the early years, but it was not what was expected that day. Anyway, I want to thank Jessie, Elinor, David, and Lynne for participating and bringing all sorts of good insights today. Thank Anna Pinto for convincing me to do these 3. For Chief, and I think Laura for posting them, and for Fawn, who was doing the technical work. And I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. Thank you, and have a good Sunday.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Thank you.
everyone.
Take
Bye.
care.